All right. So initially I gave this talk to a room full of people in the tech community out in Canada. And the idea is that a lot of people are angry. They're like, oh no, why are my cell phones so expensive? Why is my internet so expensive? And a lot of people don't realize where that comes from, why that is. I used to work for one of the big three here in Canada, so I have a little bit of inside intel. Um, and in the industry that I'm in general now, I get a lot more information around these things too. So this presentation is a couple years old, but it's very relevant today, many of the points, and we continue to have many of these problems. So choice, is there choice in Canada? It's really kind of an illusion. I'm going to get to, like I said, I'm flying through here really quickly. So what choices really exist to us, right? Well, across the country, there's only 14 carriers when it comes to cellular. But we have about 31 million people that are using it. And of the 31 million, 28 million of those people are with only 3 of the carriers. So it's kind of boggling to the mind to me because, we've got all these quote unquote choices because you see, things like Wind Mobile or SaskTel or Shaw, all these other companies, but they're not actually different. They're owned by these big 3 conglomerates. So it's kind of an illusion when you go to, Chatter or a cell phone booth and you see all these options, but they're not really options. And then those other carriers that are outside of the big 3 are basically servicing really rural areas that the big 3 weren't willing to invest in to help the Canadian population, which is also really sad. There's a lot of stuff changing now with COVID. The government is stepping up a lot more, I would argue, than they have, I think, ever. So I am very hopeful for that to be a better future. But for now, we're still kind of dealing with this. So this image kind of gives you an idea of how centralized between those 3 that we rely on. So you can see all of the purple splotches. Those are collections of towers. So the number, like where it says, for instance, the far right side where there's a big red dot, it says 298, means that in that region, there's 298 different cell towers. So all of the purple is a conglomeration. So this is another problem. Of the big 3, 2 of those 3 are actually the same cellular network. So Bell and Telus, which are purple, actually use all the same towers. So really, when it comes to actual tower usage, there's only 2 choices in most of Canada. You can see there are some patches of yellow and blue, but those are very fringe carriers like Ice Wireless and Nunavut, Telco, Northwest Tel, things like that they don't service any parts of Canada other than the regions that they do that are very small. And so it's a bit of a problem, as you can see. When we look at some numbers, these graphs kind of shout out and some of the issues. So from a mobile wireless pricing perspective, we pay more than anywhere else in the world. There's actually, not to get too much into these numbers, but there was a really interesting study that came out about 2 years ago that was highlighting all these numbers and stuff. And then when you dig into it, the company that does that study actually this past year dropped Canada from the study. We are so far out of line with the rest of the world that we were skewing their overall numbers. So when they do their global study, they removed us from the picture, which is like wild to think about, right? So this is how bad things are when it comes to stuff like that. The average, what we get, for more bang for our buck, we're paying, if you listen to the talking points of these 3 carriers, they are saying basically, oh, well, you have the best networks in the world, and that's why you pay so much, and roses and sunshine and unicorns and rainbows. So the reality is actually far from that. You can see our average connection speed for our cellular is actually far below many of our other constituents. You can see actually here, Australia is ahead of us by a few notches, and I'm going to talk about them in a minute here. But wired, it's the exact same picture. So for your actual internet speed, and Yao, you know why your internet speed was terrible? Because the large ISPs don't invest in those rural regions, and you're probably located in a region that's underserviced, and that's a huge problem. So again, there's over 40 ISPs, and some of the regions, similar to those wireless networks that I showed you, are very similar, but the overall large backbone is only, again, controlled by the big three. If you watch my presentation a while back, I actually talked about how the internet is built and how the internet is made. And one of the things I talked about was IXs. You can see the word IX there. That stands for an internet exchange point. And that's where all of the content providers, so your Facebook, your Twitter, your Google, all of the carriers. And in the US, because there's so many different carriers and so many different choices, they all meet in a variety of different places. But in Canada, because there's only three, the three kind of dictate where those meeting points are. And that's to their benefit and not to the population as a whole's benefit. So there's a real problem there as well. Again, this highlights the same thing that I was pointing out with the wireless. It's a huge problem paying for. Again, we're even lower when it comes to broadband internet speeds. We're even much further below what we're paying for. So getting back to Australia, which I touched on earlier. So Australia is very similar to us. They have about the same mass to population ratio in terms of how their populations are spread out. Half the average wireless cost is split, between these big three companies. So in Australia, the big three companies are Vodafone, Telstra, and Optus. And those are pretty much like Rogers, Telus, and Bell, but the difference is they're global companies. Rogers, Bell, and Telus actually are pretty much Canada or bust. They don't do anything anywhere else. So I think that's one of the big problems, is that because they don't experience other regions, they don't feel they have to change how they do things and what they do. When you look at what we're getting from wireline or wireless, and that's either like your hardwire or your cell phone, basically, we're getting roughly 30 to 40% less than other countries, but specifically Australia in this case, for what we're actually paying for. So their argument kind of falls flat because they say, oh, well, Canada's so spread out and we have such a diverse geography. Well, in fact, many experts say that, oh, that's a beautiful cat you've got there, Juliana. So you can actually see different problems that they could claim are the reason why things aren't working. But the reality is that Australia is just as bad, if not worse, because they have all these geographic problems, but they're also hot all year round. And we actually, as Canada, because we have snow, we get to cool a lot of our data centers which run these networks for free. So there's actually less cost. In Australia, they have to have air conditioning units at all these exchange points that I was mentioning earlier, and that's really expensive. Yet they pull it off without any issue. They have huge wildfires in Australia compared to us. We have a little bit in BC, but all of Australia experiences these wildfires. Again, destroys infrastructure, yet they still manage to keep their costs much lower than us. So why is that, right? Why does this matter, right? So this is just a brief, high level thing, but the higher costs and less flexibility hamper companies or individuals to compete on a local and global level because they want to maybe you're a person that's in your garage and you want to test like this new technology, but you can't afford the cost of internet connectivity at a speed that allows you to do it properly, versus, if you're in the US, the costs are, somewhat half in some cases. On a world stage, our companies have a huge struggle in competing because we put up these barriers, and that's actually that was one of the deterrents that skewed Amazon from coming to Canada with their other headquarters, their HQ2, which you guys will remember from a little while back when Mayor Jim Watson in Ottawa sent a bottle of maple syrup to try and get Jeff Bezos to come. Didn't work. And the other part is net neutrality. We want all of this information free and to be able to learn and grow without being interfered with. And when these three carriers shape the way that we get internet traffic. So for instance, if you are wanting to read a publication that is more left-leaning or right-leaning, and that telco believes that they feel more right-leaning or left-leaning, they can actually police the traffic so that when you go to visit a news website about a story that's more right-leaning, it'll load faster than with a left-leaning article. And that'll actually trick your brain into thinking that the right-leaning is actually a better article, or it's better written, or it's more reputable. And it actually messes with our psyche and influences our political will, which is pretty crazy to think about, but it's a real thing that's happening in Canada right now. There we go. There are some benefits. I like to stay neutral. So they do employ a ton of people in Canada. They employ over 125,000 people in Canada, which is fantastic. That's almost a quarter of all the federal government employees in Canada. If you know me well, you know I also don't like the government too. So, I hate both sides. It's fine. Corporate government muscle, it allows them to kind of keep pirates at bay. And you think about like things like China invading our privacy and things like that. They can have really stringent rules by having those three control. If you have a lot of different carriers, you don't have as much control over keeping out foreign entities. And that allows us to keep a lot of our data in Canada. So we don't have to worry about, if something goes into the US that Trump can spy on it or something like that. So there are these net benefits, but I still think the cons outweigh the pros, unfortunately. That's my own opinion though. So feel free to do your own research. These were some articles at the time talking about how these big three are also selling our data to private entities to essentially profit from us. So, we're talking about how when you're on Facebook, you get an ad for something that you searched like 3 minutes ago for, things like that. That targeting, that's what our companies are doing. In the US and other countries where there's more rules in place, specifically Europe is really good about this with the GDPR. They are able to force companies to be a lot more transparent with things like that, which is fantastic. This was an activity I did with the audience. Obviously, we're doing a short presentation, so we won't do that, but I'll give this presentation to Juliana, and if you want to think about this and kind of brainstorm it a bit, I'm happy to always talk with you by Facebook or whatever. If you have any questions, I know a lot about this stuff, so I can maybe fill in some blanks for you or give you some readings to look into it. Here are some, highlights of things that we can do. One of the companies I run is a data center. So we're a neutral data center and we pride ourselves on that. In Ottawa, we're the only one actually. So that's why that's important, because if Rogers controls the data center, then they control the data, right? There are, that was the next point is more focused on businesses. So I won't share that with you. But there's lots of voting when it comes to like CRTC and telecom policy. So I urge everyone to kind of, keep those articles top of mind when you see them on Google News or something like that, and read through them, because you can pressure your MPs to view these things and make differences and changes. Some recent things that happened in the past, there used to be, you couldn't switch phones from one carrier to another. That was people voting and telling their MPs that it wasn't fair. So now everyone can unlock their phones from carrier to carrier for free without having to pay a huge fee. That's something that we fought for and we won. Not me specifically, but us as Canadians. We've voted for shared networks. So if you were a Rogers customer and you went to Alberta, you would get no reception. There was almost no Rogers towers except for the major city like Calgary. So there was a big upheaval in 2016 whereby the CRTC stepped in and said, hey, everybody, you need to share your networks with everyone. So now if you are a Bell customer, you are allowed to roam for free on a Bell or TELUS network, whereas before you were unable to do that. So it's better service for everyone. And the idea behind that was, if you need to call 911, you shouldn't be penalized because you're with a certain carrier within our country. Everyone should have the ability to call 911 or to access a web page to, perform first aid or, whatever the case may be. You need to have access to your cell phone and the information on it. So So that's really important. And these are all things that were influenced by MPs, which forced the CRTC to make these rules against the telecoms. Let's see what else I have. Probably, I think that's it. Yeah, okay, perfect. So that is it. That's my presentation. Try to go through as quickly as I can. You should absorb probably 30, 40 minutes of info in about 10 minutes. So congratulations, everyone.